Welcome everybody to our number 2 in the series of books that changed my life. And this one is a great book, The Power of Positive Thinking. It's famous in personal development circles. It's probably one of the originals. It was first published in 1952. Now, to give you some idea of how successful this book was, it spent, I think, 48 weeks at number 1 in the New York Times sellers list. So that's almost a year. And it was on the New York Times sellers list for like 186 weeks. So almost 4 years on the New York Times bestsellers list after being published in 1952. An amazing book written by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. And he's interesting in that he was a Christian pastor. Now, as you know, pastors and Catholic priests and people like that, they get to hear probably the worst of people's lives. They're not immune to the suffering that goes on in the world because they spend their life as counsellors. And some people, are working through some deep pain, some deep problems. So he's not immune to that, but he has a particularly effective way of dealing with that. Now, being a pastor, he's obviously faith-based in his understanding. He believes in a greater power, but he also believes in the power that power gave us to deal with our problems and our pains. And that tool that he believes God gave us to deal with that is our mind. Particularly what we feed our mind, what we say, and what we do. That we can effectively change our lives by using our mind to focus on what we think, what we say, and what we do. Now, this is so aptly supported by modern day psychology, isn't it? So this was written 70 years ago, but it was right at the pointy end of understanding that our mind, the way we think, can change our lives or give it a new direction and a positive direction. So his power of positive thinking, it's not some kind of, Pollyannish, let's just all think nice things. It's actually dealing with the problems of life. Now, if you go to, the bookshelves now in the self-help area, you'll see stuff on success and achievement and dealing with fear and anxiety and dealing with addiction and dealing with pain and suffering and trauma. All those will be there in the self-help aisles. He was writing about it in this book and gives a chapter, an effective chapter, to virtually all those things, improving your relationships. Everything is in here. And this guy wrote it 70 years ago. Everything else that's around now is almost, just an iteration on what this guy was talking about. So I found him very valuable. I was going through a pretty traumatic time in my mid-teens, coming from an abusive father and a very unhappy home life. I found his writings very powerful, very helpful, both from a prayer perspective, but also from knowing that it wasn't just all up to God, it was all up to me and using the tools, the abilities, the skills that God had given me to deal with the problems that I was coming up against in my life. I found it a very, very powerful book. Now, Norman Vincent Peale died, I think, in 1993. He was aged about 95. He had had a very successful life as a pastor, as a writer, and as a speaker. And I've actually heard recordings of some of his talks. One, he's can be very funny, but also very powerful speaker. Now, interestingly, I heard Tony Robbins talking about him bumping into Norman Vincent Peale at a conference where they were both speakers. So, Tony Robbins is probably the most well-known speaker and trainer and effective life changer in the personal development space in the world today. But he met Norman Vincent Peale at this conference when Norman Vincent Peale was 94, so about a year before he died. And he said to Norman Vincent Peale, "Norman, why are you still doing this? You know, you could certainly, you know, hang up your hat on the rack and retire gracefully." And Norman Vincent Peale said in his somewhat gravelly voice, "Well, Tony, what I've discovered is there's a lot of negative people in the world." So he was motivated to keep changing people's lives and to keep changing people's perspectives until he died, effectively. So amazing man, amazing life, wrote a number of very powerful and effective books, but this was one of my favourites, The Power of Positive Thinking. So if you haven't read it and you want to read it, there's a link to the book in the description. I hope you buy it because that'll help me and it'll help you. So catch you later. And just remembering that, that's it. It's this book is timeless, and it's time for you to get into it and change your life. Catch you in the next round.